Hi, I'm Kat Rosenfield.
And I'm Phoebe Maltz Bovy, and we are an especially chaotic edition of Feminine Chaos. And we are going to begin with a discussion of an entirely new topic that has never been discussed by humanity before, namely the occasional pairing of older men with younger women. It's true.
Fact. It sometimes happens.
Fact. My own husband is 6 days older than I am.
Ooh, that's
and if he were 6 days younger, it would be a totally different story. But the wisdom acquired in those 6 first days means that I just,
Do you ever just feel like you have just no context in common? I mean,
well, sometimes I think it's like a little inappropriate to be paired with somebody who I'm not the exact same age as, like to the minute, because it's like, the imbalance. There's an imbalance built in by those 6 days.
Right. My husband is 4 years older than me, so basically he should be in jail.
Or a gulag, perhaps.
Yes. Porque no los dos. Let's do both. Both is good. All right. So now that that was all, we were kidding, by the way.
We do not, well, I mean, my husband is actually 6 days older than I am, but we do not want to imprison Kat's husband for being more than 6 days older than she is.
Right. For other things, maybe, but moving on.
So basically, this topic came into the news. For once, it was not the tired, eternal story about how on dating apps, older men all want to date 18-year-olds and 18-year-old women, and the 18-year-old women do not all want to date necessarily 50-year-old men, even if the 50-year-old men want to date 18-year-old women. No, it's a different thing. Specifically, Moby, who I'm sure you've all been thinking about a lot lately. He
every day for the past 15 years, just, in my head.
Vegan, sort of the opposite diet to the Peterson beef diet, right? Vegan? Or is he still vegan? He was certainly famous for veganism and had a vegan cafe in New York.
Yeah, I thought that I only knew about him because he was into tea. And now I'm realizing that the veganism also was, I mean, he's done so much for so many communities. The, bald glasses wearing slender man community and
It's a community.
Vegan community, the tea drinkers of the world.
What about the asexual beer drinkers?
That's to come later.
Oh, okay.
They need their own mascot. Moby is not going to be it.
Fair enough.
So
Moby musician.
Right.
Also.
Yeah, electronic music. I actually put his songs on a lot of my yoga mixes because they are kind of, ambient.
Okay. I don't know what he sings or plays or does, but
I'm not humming Moby.
Fair enough. So what happened with Moby, Kat?
Moby was set to release a book, and the title of the book, I'm just gonna go back to this because it's too funny considering what ended up happening. The title of the book is Then It Fell Apart. It's a memoir. And in this book, he relates an anecdote, multiple anecdotes about women he dated, but one of the women he claims to have dated briefly is Natalie Portman. And his telling, this was...
I need to not laugh. I think of all the men who would sort of wish that, and you need the context, which I don't know. I assume most people will have this cultural context, but maybe not. Natalie Portman is kind of like the classic woman men would like to have dated, kind of. Like, it's not just that she's a beautiful actress, but there's something kind of girl next door or something where...
Yeah, she was always like the smart man's crush, the thinking man's crush object. And, and it wasn't just about sex. It was just that, she was so worldly and noble and, whatever. Obviously, every man that I ever dated loved Natalie Portman more than me.
I think this is something we may share. But yeah. So
So,
Right.
the bitter irony that it's Natalie. But so he relates this anecdote in his book about having dated her, saying that I think he was 34 and she was 20.
That's key, that she was 20 in his telling of it.
Right.
Because
She responded that A, they never dated, and B, she was not 20, she was 18, she had just graduated from high school.
And still a teenager, had just been in high school, and these were crucial differences in her telling.
Right, yes. Right. And that she remembered him as an older man who was just being creepy and inappropriate with her when she had been in high school 5 minutes ago. Right. He then doubled down and said something online to the effect of, maybe she now regrets dating me and doesn't want to admit it, but we did in fact date. And then the internet did what the internet does.
Well, didn't he post a picture of himself possibly shirtless with her?
Oh God, thank you for reminding me that I saw that. And by thank you, I mean, I really, really wish that you had not reminded me that I saw that. Yeah. There was a shirtless photo of Moby. You're welcome. You're welcome for that mental image.
You can Google it and probably find it.
Yeah. Just in case you need a little something to look at while you're drifting off to sleep at night. So he posted this photo, but then, there was a pile on. Everyone was like, Moby, you canceled. And Moby.
Is he canceled?
Well, he canceled. So, and then, as the title of the book says, it fell apart. And
the book tour is done. Self-canceled, right? Because Arya and I discussed this in a recent podcast. Also, the self-cancellation. It seems like, although it's hard to know with celebrities like that, is it a self-cancellation, or was he sort of advised, like, stop while you're ahead, sort of thing?
Maybe, yeah. I mean, the question, was he ever truly ahead in this scenario? Which goes to a lot of the discourse that erupted surrounding this. It's no longer about Moby and Natalie Portman.
No.
It's about, is it ever okay for an older man to date a younger woman, and what are the attendant power dynamics there? And especially, is it always an imbalance of power when the woman is young and beautiful and the man is middle-aged and Moby, and he perceives her to have the power in that scenario because she is young and beautiful and desired. When the man himself perceives that he is not the one in that situation who holds the cards, is there an objective truth about the power dynamic?
Well, that is what we will try to pick apart. So I guess what I had always thought about this, and sort of bolstered by listening to Savage Lovecasts about it, and I'm talking about like pre-Me Too era, thinking about this topic. My thinking had always been, consenting adults is all you can say about this, that different people bring different things to different relationships. Everything's complicated, all of that, and that you really just sort of don't judge is the most you can say, because you don't know what's going on with other people. And while I still mostly think that, I think that there is some possibility for some sort of corrective to this, where you say, okay, like in many circumstances, in a common sense reading of things, if you just graduated from high school and there's a man in his 30s hitting on you, he may be trying to convince himself that he thinks you're, 28, but does he really? I remember, the other one of these stories we were going to talk about. Another one of these things went viral with the man who hit on something on Reddit or something, where a man hit on 19-year-olds at their birthday party.
Yes, yeah.
That was the other one. Okay, for our list. It wasn't, yeah. But yeah, so I think what happened, unfortunately, though, with the sort of Me Too corrective of this, is there is suddenly this kind of discussion of women who are definitively adults, as if, and like sometimes well into their 20s, as if they're somehow children, which they're not. You know what I mean? And I think there's a key difference between a situation where a man is hitting on like a girl, in front of her 10th grade classroom, and a situation where a man is hitting on a woman who's significantly younger, but is 27 years old or something,
Right. I mean, so there's I don't know, there's a lot about this that's really interesting to me. And also, I mean, people always act like it's super obvious which women are 25 or 26 or 28 or whatever, and which women are 18-year-olds who happen to look like they're 25. That's a thing. That's a thing that exists. Elizabeth Nolan Brown from Reason talks about this a lot and has posted pictures of herself as a 17-year-old. I think I'm not sure if she had relationships with older guys or if she's just, posting these pictures to make a point. Mm-hmm. But I mean, at 17, like, I looked like a little kid, but not everybody did.
Well, I wonder about that though. And in terms of how much of this though, like, you have to take the cultural context into account in which the people modeling clothing for, 40-year-old women are or were until 5 minutes ago 16-year-old girls.
Exactly.
So the cultural idea of what a beautiful adult woman looks like comes from like billboards, ads, just this notion of a very attractive 16-year-old girl. So I think it's not necessarily on individuals for confusing, you know what I mean? It's not necessarily that a lot of 16-year-olds pass for adults, or certainly older adults, so much as that's what's in the public eye as a woman.
I think it can be ambiguous. I don't know. I mean, what I want to do is just push back against something that I've seen, which is like, these men are lying. They always knew that this person was underage, and that was what drew them to her.
Well, what I think is really important about this story, and what interested me about it in connection with a few others, is that there's no question of anyone involved being underage. Natalie Portman, whether she was... So I would say in terms of her having been wronged here would be if Moby made up that they dated is wrong. Mm-hmm. If Moby was confused and the fact checker didn't look into it, whether she was 18 or 20, I'm not sure that the difference between 18 and 20 there, I mean, either way, she'd have been an adult. She'd have been much younger than he was. Both of those things would have been the case. And I guess it just seems like there's this kind of pattern, and there have been a few stories recently that have come up somehow, like this past week or so, about older men and younger, but definitely not underage women, such as there was apparently a very woke professor who is dating a 24-year-old former but not current student. I do not know who these people are, but I have seen people tweeting annoyed about it.
This is a very online drama.
It's too online I am not online enough to know more than that somebody's 24 and that somebody's older than 24 and that one's a professor and one was a student.
Yeah, the professor, I'll just say, was George, I'm going to butcher his last name. It's like Cicciarello Mayer, who I believe taught at Rutgers. And he's been in the news before because he tweeted about, he's famous for tweeting, "All I want for Christmas is white genocide," and having a lot of angry Fox News viewers come after him and threaten his life. So he's no stranger to controversy, but in this case, he was being canceled by people on his own side for running afoul of this like very brand new norm.
Yeah. So there was that. Then there has been, over the past few years, the fact that David Brooks, the New York Times columnist, got divorced and is now married to a different woman who is his former, I guess, research assistant, who he thanks in the acknowledgments to his book about character. And this is also a very online thing where people online accuse him of hypocrisy. Now, are they missing some bigger story? I don't know what is going on in his life. Maybe it all makes sense, but it's something where there is something kind of puritanical in the discussion of it, but there's also, maybe it's specific to do with perceived hypocrisy.
Yeah, I think that there's something about, a guy lecturing or, trying to lecture on ethics and morals, turning out to be like the ultimate cad in his private life.
Well, the ultimate, but is it the ultimate? I mean, the ultimate cad.
Or I shouldn't say the ultimate cad.
I mean, he was married to one woman. Now he's married to a different woman
who was much younger and
was much younger and was his assistant.
So it seems like a cliche. I think in a way that people find distasteful, rightfully or not.
Yeah.
But I also think that that's a separate thing from this age discrepant thing. Like, on the one hand,
oh no, not how it plays out online. People show pictures of them and are like, "Is that his daughter?" Ha ha ha. Constantly.
Oh well, okay, but
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying is, I think it's different than, you know, the idea that 20 women in their early 20s are somehow no longer complete, you know, autonomous agents capable of, you know,
Right.
making or choosing these relationships on their own. I mean, so I think that I mean, maybe there's overlap there. Like maybe David Brooks is the Venn diagram of this. But on the one hand, you have the perception of hypocrisy. And so it's not the relationship itself, but it's directed at the man, you know, for you know, doing something, for not walking the walk while he talks the talk. Then on the other hand, you have this sort of more general idea. And what's interesting to me is that it's a notion, this infantilizing thing is something that the young 20-somethings in question are doing it to themselves. You know, they're on board with this idea that a 22-year-old adult is basically a child.
Yes.
And I'm so curious as to what's feeding that.
Well, I have some theories about this. And I guess this is something that I find strange just in the culture, separate from the kind of sexy topic aspect of it. There are so many articles, and this has been going on for years now, about like studies show that the human brain only finishes developing when you're 45 years old. So you're basically a child until, you know, and it would constantly, I would read these articles and I think, well, I've already, you know, like I've completed X years of grad school, met my now husband, you know, something like various things I would think have happened in my life that seem fairly adult. You know, I've been paying, you know, like my own rent for X years, you know what I mean? Like I felt like surely I'm a grown up. But then I would read these articles and be like, no, your brain, not there yet. And maybe it's still not, you know, who knows? But I think there's something in the culture with that, and also with the whole sort of like notion of helicopter parenting, maybe, although I don't know, like, I think that really caught on for people maybe like just younger than us, perhaps. I'm not sure. But just this notion of, and somehow I connected in my head to the health insurance till you're 20, that you could be on your parents' health insurance in the States till you're 26, but not any further than that.
Right.
I mean, this all happened. I was already too old for this to have been at all relevant. And now I live in Canada. It's definitely not relevant. But yeah, I think there's this notion though in the culture that people are not adults until they're, I don't even know. There's no obvious point. And then I think that then crosses somehow with the whole Me Too question, such that it becomes possible to discuss not only that it would impact a power dynamic that a woman's a lot younger, but that she's hardly even a woman, even if because this came up with was it the Sherman Alexie discussion where there was some woman who was like in her 20s and felt and had been kissed or something.
Oh, or the Juno Diaz one. Yeah, where she's like, I was a naive 26-year-old.
That's the one. That was the discussion. Okay.
You know, but this is interesting because I think that there actually is something to that theory of it being connected to helicopter parenting. And this sort of, what I'm looking at is this generation, I mean, I shouldn't say this generation, but, you know, more so than I think in previous years, has become very sold on the idea of its own fragility. And that you see that being encouraged in a lot of different ways, in a lot of different spheres, including the kind of revisiting of past relationships and the rediscovering of trauma in something that wasn't necessarily traumatic at the time. You know, it's like now we have to reframe this as, well, you know, I thought it was all right then, but I now realize that I was victimized. Mm-hmm. And I guess that maybe, I'm just trying to think out loud here, but like, is there something going on where the notion of adulthood itself has become kind of frightening or overwhelming?
Well, there's the whole notion of it having become, just sort of in like practical terms, hard to achieve, like for economic reasons. So I think
right.
there's the whole sort of constantly reaching to have the standard of living that was promised but is not appearing for millennials. That's the sort of argument, and I think there's quite a lot to it. Whether that, I don't know. I guess I wonder though. I mean, to me, I see this as like a case of overcorrection, but not unnecessary correction. So what I think would have been better is if there's some kind of revisiting of all of this where you can say something still about a situation, even if it was consenting adults, but it doesn't have to be, and such person was a predator for hitting on a woman who had not yet turned 30. You know what I mean? Like, I think to me, I see it as a necessary correction. Because like when I would hear, like, I mean, I know I've talked about this on the podcast before, but there was once this Savage Love cast situation where it was a professor who hit on his female former student. Like, you can say something, but the something doesn't have to be, and that's disgusting. You know what I mean? Like, there seems to be this missing space for judging a bit, but not judging like black and white, sort of this person should be canceled style.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I suppose I don't think there is, in fact, a way to do that without individual people feeling that you are judging them and that you are talking shit about them. But maybe the solution is
talk a little shit,
a little bit of shit. But we're just going to talk a little bit of shit about people, and they can.
But why not? I mean, I think that's totally doable. I think the problem is to have this whole category of disgusting creep that includes people who are not doing things that are just. I mean, I think.
Yeah, trying to make it a society-wide conversation, I think, becomes more complicated. Like, you and I can sit here and, talk one-on-one about, like, well, is it in this individual instance, was it gross for David Brooks to leave his wife for his former research assistant? But we can't even agree on that because there's so much we don't know.
Right. Well, exactly. I mean, I think in that case, I think it's clear why it became a thing, given the topic, and it's very juicy in that regard. But I don't know his business, like, who knows, right? Like, I mean, anything I would say could be, I have no idea,
Yeah. I think that's what makes it hard. It makes it hard to have these conversations.
But that's why I think it should more be like, rather than about these real people and do like where we sit here and sit in judgment of columnists whose business we don't know. I feel like what I feel comfortable saying is that there are sort of, like, when I saw the whole story about Moby and Natalie Portman, I thought, okay, this would not have happened with the genders reversed, because I think there's something in the culture that tells men in their 30s that they are still 18-year-olds at heart, that they are still peers with the youth that they used to be somehow. And I don't think that there's an equivalent thing telling women that they are that. I think women reach whichever age and know. I mean, by the time I was like 22, 23, I had read like articles about how I was over the hill. You know what I mean? Like, by that John Derbyshire, it was in National Review, certainly. But yeah, I mean, I don't think women, famous or not, are able to kind of convince themselves that they are peers with 18-year-olds.
Right. Well, I'm just thinking of that. What is it? That line from Dazed and Confused, where he's like, "I love high school girls, man. Keep getting older. They stay the same age."
Yes, but that's sort of. but like, where I think that there are men out there, not all men, hashtag of course, who are able to convince themselves, and this is just, I mean, anecdotally, I have seen this in the world. Men who somehow are like not able to see that they are like 37, 47, whatever, and not 17. Whereas I don't think that there are women who reach their mid-30s unaware that they're in their mid-30s as much.
Right.
I mean, it's a wide world. I'm sure everything is out there, but that was the thing. But then the question is, do you then blame individual men for this, or is this just sort of the culture? And I guess I'm more interested in talking about the culture rather than saying that individuals have in cases where an individual has not particularly done anything wrong, then say, you know, that's sort of where I come down on this.
Well, there certainly is no cultural model for, like, when I'm just thinking about like the kind of slacker in his 30s who still dates high school students, you know, and is like barely employed. There really isn't a female version of that, I don't think. I've been like sitting here racking my brain trying to think if there is one, if there's a character who embodies that. I don't think there is.
Well, there's Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. But she's not dating high school boys. She's dating a slacker who's her own age. I mean, I think there's very much the model for the geeky girl who has a crush on the slacker guy.
Right, but is she like an eternal child? Is the thing, you know? Is there a female
little,
version
but sort of like emotionally stunted, but not in a carefree way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what makes sense is to talk about these tropes, but I think that to assume that actual people are tropes is where things tend to go wrong. And I think I think it's inevitable that that's how people talk about certainly famous people. But certainly if it's like people you know, I wouldn't assume they're tropes, if that makes sense. But yeah, I mean, I guess my objections to this sort of thing are not like... I think I still think it should just be a kind of consenting adults. Nobody's anyone else's boss. Nobody is anybody else's instructor, whatever kind of rule for this. But that beyond that, I think you don't want to say, well, like this number of years is okay, but then it's gross if it's that other number of years. It's like,
oh, it's impossible.
No.
And I mean, what's really funny is when you start trying to kind of enact these norms, not just contemporaneously, but also retroactively, you get things like woke socialist 21-year-old.
Oh my goodness.
Being deeply upset to discover that their hero Stalin had a 21-year-old wife. I'm sorry. I thought I was going to be able to make it through. Stalin had a very young wife. And
that was the issue with Stalin, you know? He was otherwise pretty great, apparently. Oh my God, in the voice of this tweeter, who could, for all we know, be some kind of bot. It feels bot-ish to me that somebody has tweeted this, but who knows? But this is Arya found this somewhere.
Yeah. Arya Cohen-Wade, our executive producer.
Thank you. So, yes, that's right.
And curator of fascinating items from the deep annals of the internet.
That's right. So I think so. Yeah. I mean, I think the problem that I have with this sort of dynamic are a couple things. One is like when men feel that they have to announce their tastes as if it's something beyond just their own taste, as if it's like relevant that like if an older man only likes younger women and feels he has to be rude about women his own age in the process, that's a problem. He doesn't have to date women his own age, but I think just not being like gratuitously rude about the people you don't want to date. I think it's fair to assume most people don't want to date most other people and they don't have to be rude about it. But then the other thing, which will perhaps segue us a little bit to our next topic, or we could stay on this if you have more on it, but that this question of sort of entitlement, and I think it's fine for men or women or anybody to have unrealistic expectations romantically, as long as they are fine with the possibility that this means they're going to be alone, and that I don't like if somebody says that the people who don't like them are shallow for not liking them, if they are liking those people for shallow reasons. I think just, accept everybody's right to be shallow. But then the question is, do older men have it tough, or is it in fact, what about these younger men?
What about when they are indeed alone?
So
involuntarily.
Oh boy, here we go.
Did we do it? We made the transition? Okay.
Oh my God. So I'll intro this one, which is that, so full disclosure, the journalist who wrote the article we're going to talk about was my editor once for something in a fashion journal. So I have worked with her once, and she seemed very nice. So that is my bias going into this, but I also did really like this article. So the New York Magazine cover story by Alice Hines called "How Many Bones Would You Break to Get Laid?" is about, it's about the incels. Are they involuntarily celibate? Is it involuntary? Are they celibate? These are questions I have also. But are the self-defined incels, why are they getting plastic surgery, cosmetic surgery? What's that about? And it's specifically about, the focus is on somebody, Truth for Lie, but that's not his real name. That is his online
handle,
his incel name. Who's 27, half Dutch and half North African, so he's an incel. And then there's a doctor named Barry Epley, who is a cosmetic surgeon in Indiana, who is a big favorite of, among other populations, the self-proclaimed incels. So what was different about this story, there's been a lot of stories since a couple different shootings by self-identified incels, including one in the city where I live, in Toronto. That was a van attack. That was something else. But a couple different attacks, by this has been in the news. But what was different about this article was that sort of the cliche is that these are men who expect to have beautiful women. And then there they are in their parents' proverbial basements, in their sweatpants, covered in the Cheeto crumbs, not caring how they look. But what this was about quite the contrary. These are men who care tremendously about what they look like themselves and are very, very concerned with their own physical appearance. Sometimes the point where it seems to be body dysmorphia, basically, something like that.
Well, they've identified, it's not just that they, are dissatisfied with their physical appearance, but they've identified their, unattractiveness as the reason why they are alone.
Absolutely. So this is different from the cliche. And I guess what fascinated me about this was really that I had always been saying, for years, writing, boring people with the topic, that basically I thought that an ideal world is where women care a bit less about what we look like, men care a little bit more about what they look like, and that equality will come from some kind of situation where men realize, and this is obviously assuming straight people, obviously if you're gay this would not be relevant, but that where men realize that women care what they look like, what the men look like. And I thought that that a fairer world will come from that realization. And that it shouldn't be that men are fixated on every single feature, but just that they understand that women are looking at them just like they're looking at women, and that's sort of equality will come from that. What seems to have happened, at least as per this article, is that men are capable of simultaneously hating themselves and hating women. And it's not like a little bit of self-criticism brings about some kind of profound understanding that everybody's looking at everybody and that's fine, and that looks are subjective and this and that, but that rather this sort of hyper self-critical approach seems paired maybe with, although we could talk about how effectively or not in the article, paired with this sort of misogyny.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that was, I guess, that was the aspect of it that I thought was the most sort of new and interesting and hard to figure out.
Yeah, I mean, I had a lot of issues with this article, and I went back and read it a second time before we sat down to chat about it, and discovered that I had even more issues with it than I thought to begin with. And one of the things that bothers me about it is that I feel like it's a subject that deserves to be covered on its own merits. If there is in fact something happening in the culture that has created this population of disaffected, alienated young men who are seeking solace in toxic spaces and in harmful and in self-harmful behaviors, that's the kind of thing that, yeah, there should be journalism about that. But that focuses literally on that. And instead what we often get almost exclusively, it seems like, when incels are covered as a topic, is, but what does this mean for women? Mm-hmm. And that, I really question the kind of continued framing of this community as a feminist issue. I'm not convinced that it is. And the thing that strikes me about these guys is like, yeah, you know, a lot of them really hate and resent women, but like they hate and resent everyone, including themselves. And like, if you go onto these forums, which I did because I was curious, what you see is, yeah, there's a lot of really gross misogynistic stuff, but insofar as these guys talk about doing violent things to women, like they tell each other to commit suicide 10 times more.
Oh,
like
it's horrible.
It's just incredibly nihilistic. And there is also the question of like the way that they communicate. It's like this dialect, and it's like a code, and it's memes, and it's gifs, and it's like this weird jargon that, you know, I mean, it's designed basically to be incomprehensible and frightening to normies. Mm-hmm. And I think that, you know, it's tricky to, as a person who's not in one of those communities, as this journalist was, you know, to spend a few weeks there and take everything you see at face value and decide that you really understand what is happening. You know, so I think that to kind of fixate on the misogynistic overtones of a lot of this stuff and decide that that's really like where the truth of this community lies is maybe a little bit sloppy, a little bit of an overreach.
I mean, yeah, I think in terms of that, I think that criticism makes sense for a lot of things I've seen on just men in general. Like I feel like it's one of the ones we talked about. Was this something like Bizarre that was about the...
Yes, I was thinking of that one too. Yeah, men have no friends and women bear the burden.
Because I think I saw somebody connecting these on Twitter. So I think this is out there. I thought that this article did this a little bit less than some others, and that's sort of almost why it draws that criticism so easily, because I feel like the forum it was in required for it to be kind of a women's issue, because these things keep appearing in sort of women's/lifestyle publications, and they need this kind of spin. But I felt like it was pretty clear that these are very miserable, very troubled men who are getting their faces reconstructed.
Right. I mean,
like, I think it's hard to come away from that article thinking it's all about, and then the poor women who have to deal with it.
I guess.
I think it was a little less, I don't know. I mean, I have a lot of issues though with the way incel, like I also wanted to just pick up on something you said about sort of taking at face value. Mm-hmm. So I think that just the media coverage of this topic in general, there's something that frustrates me, and that frustrated me less with this article, and I'll explain why, but like that in general just really frustrates me with this topic, where a lot of the men being discussed are boys effectively, or they're very, very young men who are young enough that there's nothing unusual about the fact that they haven't had a girlfriend yet. Mm-hmm. And it's discussed as like this, why will no one date them? It's like, gee, you know, like when somebody's 19, male, female, whatever, maybe nobody has dated them yet, and that's not actually a crisis. Even if even doing justice to that, it might feel like a crisis to the 19-year-old in question. There isn't an actual issue, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Like in the real world, it's not like they must be somehow undateable. Maybe they just haven't had a date yet. So that's one aspect of it. Another is, and this came up in this article, there was this, are they in fact men who are not having any sex and could not? And I guess, well, there was this one man, this is a quote from the article, Mike, a tour guide in Austria in his mid-30s, has spent so much time on incel forums that he, quote, doesn't know anyone in real life anymore, end quote. But he's not technically an incel, he says. He slept with 50 women in his life, though only, quote, 10% were hot. This is extreme, maybe, okay? No, this is end of quote. But I think there is something to the possibility that these are teenagers and men, young men, whatever, who, whether or not they are actually having sex, could be, but are just not noticing the women who like them. I think there's no reason to be sure that that's not happening, that they are defining women as women who they want to sleep with, you know? So I guess that's what just to sort of wrap up that rather long-winded thought. I think there's an issue where media coverage of incels tends to take at face value that, one, these are men who can't ever get a date and it's this tragic situation, which is out there, but I don't think is necessarily everybody who's self-defining this way. And also sort of both that they're sort of that, like the media coverage of it tends to present it as the situation of the 40-year-old virgin, right? Not the movie, but
yeah, I'm not actually sure that I agree with that. I feel like, you know, it's much more the media coverage that I've seen. So maybe we're just reading different things. What I've seen of this is that it presents it as like, this is a violent hate group kind of a thing. And it's very focused on the young and most extreme and most angry.
Oh no, I don't think these things are in conflict necessarily. I think it does do that. But I think that what's not questioned is the basic premise that these are men who would like to have sex, and no woman on the whole face of the earth will have sex with them. You know, and I think that basic premise needs to be a lot more challenged than it is. And I think another aspect of it that fits into this is this notion that there's something uniquely male about being 19 and having not had the relationship you want yet.
Right. Well, that's obviously
quite universal. And I think a lot could be done by just sort of noting that there are, if that's all that's meant by involuntarily celibate, well, that's a lot of women also.
Oh, for sure. Well, I think actually like a woman is the one who coined the term incel.
In Toronto, I think also.
Yeah. all the good stuff is in Toronto.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I guess that maybe it comes down to, and this could be kind of the issue with, or the issue that both of us take from different angles with all this coverage, is that there's an attempt being made every time somebody writes about this community to construct a narrative about them, about what it all means. And I think that maybe the issue is that they don't really mean anything. You know, this is like this is a small group, all told, of really alienated, angry, frequently like deeply mentally ill people. And that, you know, you can pluck all kinds of storylines from there, you know, including some really sensational ones, without necessarily reaching the truth of what the community actually represents.
Well, it's interesting. I don't know. I mean, I think there is something to be said for both the fact that this apparently doesn't exist in an equivalent way among women, and that it's or perhaps that it is not covered in an equivalent way among women. For all I know, there are forums of women who have never gotten a date and nobody cares that these forums are out there, and there have not been articles about them, because I only know that the ones for men exist because there have been articles.
Yeah,
I think there's something different going on. I think the problem I have with the coverage of this topic, again, less so this one because I think it kind of challenged it in various ways and had this other angle, but just this notion that there are specifically like articles saying there are men in this situation, and it's a situation that men get into, young men, boys, or teenage boys, young men. It just kind of like erases, to use the trendy term, the fact that there are plenty of women in that situation too, and that they're just super young, and that most people who want to end up having relationships, and the fact that they haven't at 17, at 19, might be very upsetting to them in the moment. You don't have to be dismissive of their hurt in that moment, but it doesn't, that itself, I think the problem is taking, like, there was some article, I feel like this may have been in the Daily Beast or Salon or something like a while ago, where it was profiling some guy, and he was in high school and his girlfriend had dumped him. So now he's an incel. And it's like, no, you know, like, I'm sorry, but like when I was in 10th grade and not liked back by various boys, was I an incel? No, you know, that's not
right.
That's
right.
just being a teenager. you know?
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I just think about like when I was writing this advice column, I heard from girls all the time. I mean, much more often from girls than from guys who had never, it was like never been kissed. NBK, it had its own acronym. And they had never had a relationship with anybody and had, unsuccessfully tried to pursue guys who didn't like them back. And, again, it was like a standard thing. I don't know, honestly, if they gathered somewhere online.
Well, the cliche is that they would have turned this into their own kind of, that they turn it against themselves and they think, oh, it's me, I'm ugly, I'm fat, I'm this, I'm that, whereas that the guys would say, oh no, it's the girls, and they're being shallow. And what I thought was interesting with this article is that it's saying that no, these guys in that situation actually do turn it against themselves. Mm-hmm. I guess I had just thought that would be somehow the road to some sort of liberation, and it seems to have not been that. Yeah.
Said the horrible beauty standards just crush us all like bugs.
Exactly. And then actually that brings up something else that I think is important to talk about with this, which is this thing that's sort of unfair maybe to do with male appearance, which is that when men, this has to do with our culture and how things are culturally shaped and all of this, but when men do things with their physical appearances to do with like their faces or something like this, it tends to read as kind of artifice in a way that it doesn't when women do it, because altered women's faces are just much more familiar. So right. I guess the question is what these men are doing, like when women sort of make themselves over to look as, whatever Kardashian-like as they can, there is going to be some audience for this. Mm-hmm. Is what these men are doing, I mean, there's just something kind of bleak about the fact that it might not even, that it's all this stuff and it's only just going to make them seem like there's something up with them. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly not this is one of the things that one of the guys said where I was like, okay, he does in fact have a point, which is that there's a lot less support for men who want to alter their physical appearance through surgery or even invasive surgery in order to look more attractive.
Yeah, I mean, there's maybe less support, but also just, does it actually in our culture work? And I think part of the issue and part of why these men are in a way easy to be laughed at is because the result ends up looking more likely strange and not that it's not anything strange or having been done. It's strange to surgically alter for no particular reason anybody's face, but when it's men who do it, it reads as more strange because you see it less.
Yeah, I mean, they may not necessarily be telling people in the aftermath that they had surgery, and I think that
that's true.
But some of these guys
look more different. Like I think when a woman has had plastic surgery, cosmetic surgery, it might not even, because it's just less of a thing, people might not notice. Does that make sense? Yeah. Let's talk about like makeup. If a man is wearing makeup, it's more noticeable than if a woman is wearing makeup.
Yes. I'm not sure the same thing goes for plastic surgery, particularly not the surgery that this doctor is doing. And that is actually supported a little bit in the narrative, although this isn't focused on because, it's the sort of maladjusted men who get most of the space in the piece. But there are guys who get the surgery and then leave this forum because they presumably have rejoined society as handsome men or are living their best lives or feel like they are. Mm-hmm. I don't know. So I don't know. But I mean, it was, the framing of this piece to me, I mean, I suppose it's true that it, to focus on the plastic surgery, I almost wish that there had been more of that and less. There was a line that jumped out to me where she says, the forums rarely mentioned wage gaps, pregnancy discrimination, or sexual violence except in jest. And it's like, the 25-year-old who's literally living in his parents' basement, working at Best Buy, saving up money to.
Well, I think to be fair, I think the point was that these men imagine a world in which life is so much worse for men than for women. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. I guess where I land on this is just kind of like when it comes to teenage heartbreak, it's bleak for everybody, and that
right. Well, I mean, not all these guys are teenagers. I think that there's, my issue with that line is, it it would be bizarre for a guy in this position on one of these message boards to see the world through that lens. Be like, why aren't you talking about pregnancy discrimination or the wage gap? It's like, you know.
It would be. So I agree that it would be bizarre for them, like, to specifically be talking about those issues. I think what's bleak about this to me is that they're viewing it all in this sort of completely hyper-gendered way, where the situation of somebody of unrequited love, basically, or lust or whatever, where they frame it as this, it's because those are women, we are men, you know, and that's why, rather than, like, there was this great line in I feel like we talk about her each time because we really like her writing, but Taffy Brodesser, she wrote something about the book, The Rules, and something about how, like, the real issue is, like, with dating is that one person always likes the other more, and that it's not actually something so gendered. And I thought that was just really brilliant and really true. And I feel like if I could just kind of convey anything to the young men in these forums, who I'm sure care what I think, it would be that these things are just universal. Is feeling, not universal down to every single person, but like feeling that way. I think for years people imagined only girls felt that way. Like that feeling of being just like thinking you are just so ugly no one will ever like you. I think it's important to understand that that feeling is not unique to young men. It's not unique to young women. It's just something out there.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And that it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with how you actually look and all of this. It might, but it also might not. Yeah, I mean, some of the pictures that illustrate the article, it's like people look. It was some sort of app, right? Where they're
photoshopping their selfies, right?
And the selfies, they look like perfectly normal before.
Yeah,
yeah. That was part of what was so striking, is it's these men who just look like anyone you see on the street, nothing particular. Yeah. So I don't know. Do you have more on?
I just think that that's kind of where, like, the mental illness thing comes in.
Oh, absolutely.
Which is really breezed past. Like the guy that she profiles mainly, that what was it, Truth for?
Oh, his scars won't, or his whatever wounds won't heal from this.
Well, I mean, she's catching up with him, and he's having surgery in between suicide attempts. Like, this is not a well person.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's another thing where it's like, if you were going to use somebody as your case study for this community, and you want to talk about, like, what is the nut of their ideology, you know, what does it all really mean? And why are they getting plastic surgery? I think it would have been more effective to focus on somebody who's not clearly really, really, really ill.
I agree. I think, I agree that was because you don't get the sense that with that guy there's anything much outward focused about it. It seems it's taken on a life of its own, and it's more like body dysmorphia and less.
Yes. He keeps going back to get more surgeries, and he's never satisfied with them. And then he has a wound that won't close.
Right, that was the thing.
Yeah. I know, it was painful. It was painful to read.
I mean, oh boy. All right. Well, that's I'm gonna. Yeah.
And with that pleasant image from Moby shirtless to open sores,
we're going to talk about something much more aesthetically happy, namely, okay. So a recommend. We're going to do our wrap up segment, and
yes,
is it fair to say that we recommend it's on Netflix? Always Be My Maybe.
Yes.
Movie. I will give it the tremendous
enthusiastic thumbs up
endorsement of that. I stayed up to watch it at night, and I have a small baby and do not often stay up at all at night, except if I have to because of the baby, and baby was asleep. But I watched the entire movie in one go, and it's fantastic. And it has, so Ali Wong, who also, her Netflix specials, I think, are pretty great too. That's what drew me to this. And also, certain gentleman by the name of Keanu Reeves, who is hilarious and very, like, sort of self-parodying in it.
Yeah, I was like, you almost don't want to really talk about this too much for fear of spoiling it, but I mean, that
he plays himself is all I'm going to say.
Yeah, he plays himself, and it's transcendent.
It is. It's like, I mean, like I was watching the closing credits and there's a song going with the closing credits and I was like laughing. It was gonna, like fall over. Like it was so funny. It's just so good. It's so good. I don't want to say anything else about it other than just like I never watch like contemporary stuff at all. I watch a lot of like old sitcoms and stuff. This is good. This is good. So that's good. Then there's a recommend as cultural object, but not recommend to endorse is the children's book Alice Waters and the Trip to Delicious, which I saw it on display at the public library near me and had to get it. I mean, take it out of the library. It's this like book about how wonderful the Chez Panisse chef in Berkeley, and food visionary Alice Waters is, but like a picture book for children. It's not actually by Alice Waters. It's like about how wonderful she is, but with an afterword by Alice Waters, where it's like
Alice Waters fan fiction for children.
It's very strange. But it's about there in the afterword. Alice Waters tells you to only eat local foods or something, and like the fresh tomatoes. And then I was at the farmers market in Toronto in June last weekend, and there was like only asparagus and some rhubarb and some apples from the fall. And it's like, yeah, that's not happening. And it annoyed me that they even put that up in the library here. But then the line in this that got to me and that I just somehow can't stop thinking about is from the story. It's Alice made school lunch for her daughter Fanny. Leafy greens, garlic toast, a piece of last night's chicken, some tasty surprise to make her smile. As she planned Fanny's lunches, she wondered about other kids. Were they eating lunch? A good lunch? I don't know why this happening. On the one hand, she's doing something noble. She's bringing a farm to a school, which I'm sure in a climate other than Ontario's could be quite useful. But oh my God, this notion that if your mother isn't specifically Alice Waters,
you might not be eating lunch.
There's just no lunch.
Lunch is not a part of your world. What is lunch? What
Alice Waters, and then the next page, a lot of it, it's like somehow everything that's kind of aloof about that sort of branch of the food movement becomes comically more so when it's presented in a picture book. I don't know, but the thing about lunch, like, oh no, children who are not Alice Waters' child can still eat lunch. Like it still happens. Yeah, might not be as good, but you know.
Rarely, you know, they stumble upon a lunch in the wild.
Well, then the following picture, like it's these children where she's going to bring the farm to which is, I'm sure, a noble thing, but she's bringing the farm because and it shows in this sort of like very glum looking scene where they're like lining up to get some tacos, but that's supposed to be like bad that they're getting tacos from a truck, and I'm thinking I want a taco from a truck. Why like a bad ththing?
Meanwhile, Alice Waters' daughter is like trying to trade away her dry chicken from last night for a taco. None of the other kids want it.
I mean, well, then there was
assume.
No, well, quite the contrary. I think she might be selling a very expensive spoon based on Alice Waters' I don't know if she's selling it, but anyway,
no, Fanny grew up to be...
She is selling the spoon. Okay. Because there was this famous thing a few years ago where Alice Waters went on TV and cooked an egg using this like very special spoon, using her, I think, like wood burning fireplace to show how like simple foods are good. And this picture book also has something about like that food doesn't need to be fancy to be good. It could be just, you could serve at a dinner party a fried egg. And I just immediately, melon. Yes, or some melon. And I immediately pictured the egg. And if you Google Alice Waters egg, you will get to various videos, probably also an article about the famous egg.
I had the pleasure of reading about how the egg became a flashpoint in the Me Too movement.
Yes, that New York Times article. Yeah. It's quite an egg. So basically, so that story was fascinating. Not as a children's book, though. Like, I don't think any children want to read this, but I thought it was pretty funny. And then we have finally an unrecommend, I guess, or
you know, at least something that mystifies us.
Yes.
Budweiser has officially posted its Pride tweet poster, both
Budweiser UK.
Right. Oh, yeah. I guess that's important.
I don't know.
And I didn't actually take the time to discover if this was just like a concept design, concept art, or if the can itself actually exists.
That's interesting.
But the beer, the beer can,
that could be the actual can.
Yeah, collector's item. So it's been what, striped? It's a striped can for Pride, but it's basically like Pride for well, I guess asexuals, but they
have a few a few designs,
a few different stripes. There's,
but one of them, but there's a few different ones. There's one that's, I think, for bisexuals also, but then there's this one that's the asexual.
Right. This one was all for people who,
on the spectrum.
Like, you could be heterosexual, you could be straight, and you can still have a Pride can if you are asexual or gray asexual, which is where you want to have sex sometimes, but not all the time.
Okay, so the aspect of this that I'm obsessed with, and the reason I thought we had to mention it, is the phrasing was something like, such and such gray asexuals or something are people who only sometimes want to have sex, as if the default in society is just continuously like everybody's just kind of like in some sort of continuous orgy, except for the gray asexual population who must be,
or if they're not actually actively having sex, they're just like, they're desperate for it. And actually, so we didn't plan to recommend this, but there's this great new comedy skit show on Netflix called I Think You Should Leave. And there's a sketch that deals with this, where a guy has a honk if you're horny bumper sticker on his car. And this man pulls up behind him and it's like, oh my God, that's me. And, I'm so horny all the time. Frantically honking his horn, he follows him home, and then it just, the whole show is about taking these concepts and then taking them like multiple steps further than you expect.
Well, that's kind of what that sets up. Because I feel like I think it's certainly possible that in society, I don't know where this would fit with Pride specifically. I guess this is not my lane in many levels, but like, if you truly, truly are 100% asexual, I'm sure people are always like, why don't you date somebody? And you're like, no, I am asexual or something. Or going by various Savage Love casts, you do date, but you just
don't have
sex or don't have as much sex or something. I don't know. But that I could kind of see as a thing. But what confuses me is the notion of a specific category that should be celebrated for Pride of people who do not want to have sex at every second of every day.
Yeah. Or who only want to have sex with people with whom they feel an emotional bond, which is now called demisexuality. And this is funny because back in my heyday as a teen advice columnist, all of this stuff became just kind of the framework for kids who were working through their identities, which is, what teenagers do. But because, the idea that your identity was tied to your sexuality had become so prevalent that was the framework that they were using for figuring out who they were. And the problem with that is when you're 14, you really don't have your entire sexuality figured out.
No.
And so I would get lots and lots of letters from kids, who were like, I'm 15 and I feel really weird about sex and I'm pretty sure I'm asexual and I want to come out to my parents as asexual. I'd say, you don't have to do that. You could just give it time. And a lot of, it would be surprisingly controversial to suggest to teenagers that like, maybe they should take a little time to figure it out, because it was seen as invalidating, and in some cases it was seen as akin to like telling a gay kid that if they waited a little while they would turn straight. But I think there is something there's a clear difference.
I think this is where we can come full circle, actually. And I'm excited about that because this is not even planned.
Ooh.
But we're going to come full circle with this, which is that I think it's very similar to the whole incel while a teenager concept. which is that I think putting an adult specific label on being a teenager who's not yet having sex, whether it's asexual or incel, has certain sort of conceptual problems. And I think there's a way to both be respectful of how a teenager feels in the moment and also kind of give the context of life is not just your teen years, and
life is long and things will change. I
Yeah.
like that.
yeah.
Well, I have officially reached the point where I can no longer flee from this sunbeam that's been chasing me around my table.
Well, fair enough.
So-
You're down in the States where there is sunshine. Oh, it's actually not so bad here, but yeah.
So I think, we have reached the end.
I think we have. All
This
right.
has
Well, it's been great.
This has been Feminine Chaos.
It certainly has. Till next time.